The night of my 58th birthday was supposed to be quiet, simple, and peaceful. I had never expected an expensive gift or a grand celebration. After 30 years of marriage, all I truly wanted was a warm meal, a few kind words, and the feeling that the life I had spent decades building still meant something. I placed a small birthday cake on the dining table, lit the candles myself, and waited for my husband Robert to come home. But the moment the front door opened, everything I believed about my marriage shattered. Robert did not walk in carrying flowers. He did not smile or wish me a happy birthday. Instead, he stepped into the house with a young woman standing beside him. She was beautifully dressed, confident, and looked around my home as if she already belonged there. For a few seconds, I could not understand what I was seeing. Then Robert looked directly at me with a cold expression I had never seen before. "She is going to live here starting today," he said without hesitation. "You need to pack your things and leave." Those words echoed through the living room, making the entire house feel unfamiliar. This was the same home where I had spent 30 years cooking meals, cleaning rooms, taking care of his parents, and sacrificing my own dreams for the family. Yet in a single moment, Robert spoke as if I was nothing more than an unwanted guest. The woman beside him gave me a small smile. Her name was Jessica. She tried to appear uncomfortable, but I could see the satisfaction hidden in her eyes. She was not ashamed of taking another woman's place. She was proud. The way she stood next to Robert, the way her hand rested on his arm, and the way she looked at my home told me she believed she had already won. Robert sighed heavily, pretending this situation was painful for him. "I have reached my limit, Mary," he said. "Jessica understands me. She knows how hard I work. She supports me in a way you never did." I stared at the man standing in front of me and wondered when he had become a stranger. For 30 years I had stood by him. When his parents became sick, I was the one who stayed beside their beds day and night. I prepared their meals, helped them walk cleaned after them, and comforted them until their final moments. Robert always claimed he was too busy with work, so every responsibility quietly became mine. But now he acted as if all those years had never existed. To him, I was only the woman who stayed home, the woman who complained, the woman he no longer needed. Jessica gently touched his shoulder and spoke in a soft voice. "I'm sorry, Mary. Robert just doesn't love you anymore." Her words were polite, but there was nothing kind about them. At that moment, my eyes noticed something shining on her wrist. It was an expensive watch, a watch I recognized immediately. Months earlier, I had seen the purchase on Robert's credit card statement. When I questioned him about it, he told me it was a gift for an important business client. Now the truth was standing right in front of me. The money he claimed was for work had been spent on another woman. The late nights, the secret phone calls, the strange perfume on his clothes, everything finally made sense. A part of me wanted to scream. Another part wanted to demand an explanation. After 30 years together, I deserved at least that much. But I did neither. I simply stood there silently, because I knew tears would only give Robert the satisfaction of believing he still had power over me. My calm reaction irritated him. "Are you even listening?" he snapped. "This is my house. I paid for it. I built this place with my money. You have no reason to stay here anymore." Then he pulled a stack of papers from his briefcase and threw them onto the table. Divorce papers. His signature was already there. "Sign them," he ordered. "Pack your things and leave by tomorrow morning. And leave your keys behind. You have no right to come back." Robert looked at me as if he had already won. He expected me to cry. He expected me to beg him to change his mind. He expected the woman who had silently endured everything for 3 decades to collapse in front of him. But he was wrong. I slowly reached into my pocket and took out my keys. The small metallic sound filled the silent room as I removed the house key from the ring. Then I placed it carefully on top of the divorce papers. Robert stared at me in surprise. For a brief moment, his confidence disappeared. He did not understand why I was leaving so easily. Then he laughed. Finally being reasonable for once, he said, "Maybe if you had always acted like this, things would have been different." Jessica laughed quietly beside him. Their laughter filled the house I had protected for 30 years. And strangely, that was the moment I stopped feeling hurt. The last piece of love I still carried for Robert disappeared completely. I walked upstairs to pack my belongings. I did not take expensive furniture, jewelry, or anything that reminded me of him. All I packed were a few clothes, old photographs, and a small wooden box that held something far more valuable than Robert could ever imagine. When I returned downstairs, Robert and Jessica were already eating the birthday cake I had bought for myself. The cake meant to celebrate my life had become a symbol of their new beginning. But I no longer cared. "I will be gone soon," I said calmly. Robert waved his hand without even looking at me. Good. Don't come back. I opened the front door and stepped into the cold night air. Before leaving, I turned around one final time and looked at the house where I had spent half of my life. Inside, Robert and Jessica were celebrating. They truly believed they had taken everything from me. My marriage, my home, my dignity. But what they did not know was that the key sitting on the table was already worthless. Robert thought he had thrown me away. He thought he had finally started the perfect new life with a younger woman. But the truth he ignored for years was about to destroy everything, because that house was never truly his. The cold night air touched my face the moment I stepped outside. Behind me, the warm lights of the house still glowed through the windows. I could faintly hear Robert and Jessica laughing inside, celebrating as if they had just won a great victory. To them, this was the beginning of a perfect new life. A younger woman had taken my place, and Robert believed he had finally removed the wife he no longer wanted. He thought I had walked away with nothing, but he had no idea how wrong he was. The key I left on the table was not a sign of surrender. It was not proof that I had accepted defeat. It was simply the final piece of a plan that had been quietly unfolding long before that night. Robert believed the house belonged to him because he had spent years reminding me of it. I paid for this place. I built this house. Without me, you would have nothing. Those words had followed me for decades. At first, they hurt. Eventually, I became numb to them. I stopped trying to defend myself because Robert never wanted a conversation. He only wanted control. As I walked away from the home where I had spent 30 years of my life, I expected to feel empty. I thought losing the place where I raised my daughter, celebrated holidays, and created countless memories would break my heart. But strangely, I felt peaceful. Because for the first time in many years, I was finally free. I arrived at a small motel near the edge of town late that night. The room was nothing special. The walls were plain, the furniture was old, and the small bed could never compare to the large bedroom I had shared with Robert. Yet somehow that tiny room felt warmer than the house I had just left, because there was no anger waiting for me there, no footsteps that made my heart race, no cruel comments reminding me that my sacrifices were worthless. I placed my small bag on the floor and sat quietly on the bed. The silence around me felt unfamiliar. For 30 years, my life had been filled with responsibilities, expectations, and endless demands from others. I had almost forgotten what peace sounded like. Slowly, I opened my bag and pulled out an old photograph. It was a picture of my father. His gentle smile immediately brought tears to my eyes. My father was not a wealthy man. He never owned expensive cars or wore designer clothes. He was a simple, hardworking man who spent most of his life taking care of plants and working with his hands. But everything he owned, he earned honestly. The land beneath our house was his greatest treasure. Before Robert and I ever built a home there, it was a beautiful garden filled with flowers, fruit trees, and memories. My father spent years caring for every inch of that land. When I married Robert, my father gave it to me as a gift. "Build a happy home here, Mary," he told me. At that time, I truly believed I would. I imagined a house filled with laughter, love, and family. But Robert saw something completely different. He did not see my father's memories. He saw property. He saw value. He saw something he could control. When we started building the house, Robert immediately changed everything. The garden my father loved was removed. The trees he had planted with his own hands were cut down. I still remember watching the old oak tree fall. That tree had been there since my childhood. I cried that day. But Robert showed no sympathy. "Stop being emotional," he said. "I'm building a better house here. You should be grateful." Those words were the beginning of a pattern that lasted for 3 decades. Little by little, Robert stopped treating me like a partner. He treated me like someone who existed only to serve him. When his parents became sick, he brought them into our home and told me taking care of them was my responsibility. At first, I accepted it because they were family. I woke up early every morning to prepare their meals. I took them to medical appointments. I cleaned, cooked, and stayed beside them during their most difficult days. Years passed and my own life slowly disappeared. While Robert continued working, traveling, and meeting people, my world became smaller and smaller. Whenever I asked for help, his answer was always the same. "I work all day. The house is your job." Even when I became sick, nothing changed. There were days when I could barely stand, but I still forced myself out of bed because everyone depended on me. And Robert never noticed. Or maybe he simply did not care. The man who once promised to protect me became the person who made me feel the most alone. Many people wondered why I stayed. The answer was simple. My daughter Emily. Whenever I thought about leaving, I saw her innocent face. I did not want her childhood destroyed. I wanted her to have a family, a home, and a place where she felt safe. So I endured. Year after year, I swallowed my pain. I ignored my loneliness. I convinced myself that protecting my family mattered more than protecting my own happiness. But what Robert never understood was that my silence was not weakness. I saw everything. I remembered everything. And most importantly, I knew something he had completely forgotten. The house he loved bragging about was never truly his. The foundation beneath his feet, the land he proudly stood on, and the property he planned to enjoy with Jessica all came from my father. The legal ownership belonged to me. Years earlier, when Robert faced financial trouble, certain documents had been changed to protect the property. He signed papers without reading them carefully because he always believed he was smarter than everyone else. Especially me. That arrogance became his biggest mistake. He spent years looking down on me, never realizing that the woman he underestimated was the only reason he still had a roof over his head. Sitting alone in that motel room, I gently placed my father's photograph on the table. For the first time in decades, I felt like I could breathe. Robert and Jessica were probably inside my house at that very moment, making plans, choosing decorations, and imagining their future together. They thought they had taken everything away from me. They thought I was a helpless woman starting over with nothing. But tomorrow morning, reality would finally reach them. The key Robert held so proudly would become useless. The house Jessica dreamed of owning would never belong to her. And Robert would discover the truth he should have learned years ago. Money can build walls, but it cannot erase ownership. It cannot erase the truth. And it certainly cannot erase 30 years of a woman's patience finally coming to an end. Looking back, I realized Robert's betrayal did not begin on the night he brought Jessica into my home. That night was only the moment he finally revealed the person he had become. The truth had started showing itself months earlier through small details I almost ignored. After 30 years of marriage, you learn someone's habits better than they know themselves. You recognize their footsteps before they enter a room. You know their mood from the way they close a door. You can tell when a simple answer hides something much deeper. And Robert had changed. At first, the changes were small. He started coming home later than usual. His phone, which he used to leave carelessly on the table, never left his hand anymore. He even carried it into the bathroom. He bought new clothes, cared more about his appearance, and suddenly became protective over his personal belongings. When I asked simple questions, he became defensive. When I showed concern, he called it complaining. I wanted to believe there was another explanation. After all, 30 years of marriage is not something you easily doubt. But everything changed because of one missing item. One afternoon, I opened the drawer in the living room where we kept our important documents. I was preparing to schedule some repairs for the house, so I needed to check our savings account. That money was not just ordinary savings. It represented years of sacrifice. Every dollar came from careful decisions, meals I cooked. Instead of eating out clothes, I chose not to buy vacations we never took. It was supposed to protect us during retirement. But when I opened the drawer, the savings book was gone. At first, I thought I had misplaced it. I searched every folder, every cabinet, every possible place. Nothing. That evening, when Robert returned home, I asked him calmly, "Have you seen the savings book? I need it for the house repairs?" His reaction told me everything. Instead of answering normally, Robert immediately became angry. "How should I know where you put things?" he shouted. "You probably lost it yourself. Stop acting like I did something wrong." I stood there silently. The anger itself did not surprise me. Robert had been impatient with me for years. But this was different. His voice was loud, but his eyes were nervous. He avoided looking directly at me. After 3 decades together, I knew the difference between frustration and fear. Robert was not angry because I accused him. He was angry because I had found something I was never supposed to notice. The next morning after he left for work, I went directly to the bank. I still remember sitting across from the employee as she printed the account history for me. The moment I looked at the paper, my hands went cold. Almost everything was gone. $30,000. The money we had spent years saving had disappeared in one transfer. And the name beside that transaction was a name I had never seen before. Jessica. I stared at those letters for a long time. A stranger's name was attached to the money I had sacrificed years of my life to save. That was the moment I understood. The late nights. The secret messages. The strange perfume on his clothes. They were not coincidences. They were pieces of a truth I did not want to accept. My husband had taken our future and handed it to another woman. I thought that discovery would destroy me. But strangely, I did not cry. Something colder than sadness replaced my pain. Clarity. For the first time, I stopped seeing Robert as the man I married. I started seeing the man he truly was. Instead of confronting him immediately, I waited. Robert believed my silence meant ignorance. That was his second mistake. Every night I watched carefully. Every excuse. Every phone call. Every unexplained expense. I wrote everything down. Soon the truth became impossible to ignore. Expensive restaurants. Luxury stores. Hotel charges. Jewelry purchases. The same man who told me we needed to save money was spending thousands of dollars impressing another woman. One receipt hurt more than the others. A luxury watch. Months earlier, I had questioned that purchase after seeing the credit card statement. Robert looked me directly in the eyes and lied. It is a gift for an important business client. I believed him, because after 30 years, I still wanted to trust my husband. But now I knew that important client had a name. Jessica. The woman wearing that watch while standing inside my house. The woman who smiled at me while pretending to be sorry. But the money was only the beginning. The deeper I looked, the darker Robert's secrets became. One morning he rushed out for work earlier than usual. He claimed he had an important meeting and barely even said goodbye. After he left, I cleaned the house like I always did. When I entered his office, something caught my attention. His desk drawer. The drawer he always kept locked. For years, Robert told me never to touch anything inside. "This has nothing to do with you," he would say. But that morning, for the first time, he made a mistake. The key was still there. I stood in front of that drawer for several minutes. Part of me was afraid of what I might find. Another part of me already knew. The truth was waiting inside. I turned the key. The drawer opened. Inside were stacks of papers, envelopes, and documents Robert had carefully hidden from me. The first things I found were debt statements. One after another. Credit cards. Loans. Overdue payments. Thousands and thousands of dollars. The total was more than $50,000. I could barely believe what I was seeing. Robert was not the successful, responsible man he pretended to be. He was drowning financially. And instead of admitting the truth, he kept borrowing money to protect his image and impress Jessica. Every expensive dinner. Every gift. Every lie. They were all paid for with money he did not have. But then I found something even worse. At the bottom of the drawer was a large envelope. Inside was a real estate document. When I read the title, my entire body froze. It was a draft agreement to sell the house. My house. The home built on the land my father left for me. Robert was secretly trying to sell it. He planned to take the money, pay his debts, and start a new life with Jessica. I kept reading. Then I saw something that turned my shock into pure anger. My signature. Except I had never signed anything. Robert had copied my name onto the document. He was willing to erase 30 years of my life with a fake signature. The house where I cared for his parents. The place where I raised our daughter. The last gift my father ever gave me. Robert saw all of it as nothing more than money. At that moment, every remaining feeling I had for him disappeared. I carefully took pictures of every document. The debts. The fake agreement. The proof of what he had done. Then I placed everything back exactly where I found it. Because I finally understood something. Confronting Robert with anger would only give him a chance to prepare. I needed patience. I needed evidence. For years, Robert thought my silence meant I was weak. He believed I was just a housewife who would accept anything because I had nowhere else to go. But he never realized that while he was planning to betray me, I was discovering every secret he tried to bury. He thought he was building a new future. But with every lie, every stolen dollar, and every forged document, Robert was only building the evidence that would destroy him. After discovering everything Robert had hidden from me, my first instinct was not revenge. It was disbelief. I sat alone in the living room that afternoon, staring at the walls of the house where I had spent almost half of my life. Every corner carried a memory. Every room held a piece of my past. The kitchen where I cooked thousands of meals. The hallway where my daughter Emily took her first steps. The garden where my father once stood proudly before everything changed. For 30 years, I protected this home because I believed it represented my family. But Robert only saw it as something he could use. Something he could sell. Something he believed belonged to him. A younger version of myself might have confronted him immediately. I might have cried, shouted, and demanded to know how he could betray someone who had stood beside him for so long. But I was no longer that woman. Pain had taught me patience, and patience had taught me control. Robert expected emotions from me. He expected anger. He expected weakness. That was exactly why I refused to give him any of those things. Instead, I picked up my phone and called the one person I trusted more than anyone. My daughter, Emily. The moment I heard her voice, the strength I had been holding on to almost disappeared. Mom, is something wrong? For a few seconds, I could not answer. No mother wants to tell her child that the family she believed in was falling apart. No mother wants to admit that the man her daughter called father had become someone completely different behind closed doors. But Emily was no longer a little girl. She deserved the truth. Slowly, I told her everything. The missing retirement money, the transfer to Jessica, the hidden debts, the forged documents, the plan to secretly sell the house. Emily stayed silent until I finished. Then she said something I never expected. Mom, I knew you were unhappy for a long time. Her words surprised me. I had spent years pretending everything was fine. I smiled during family dinners. I defended Robert's behavior. I hid my exhaustion because I never wanted my daughter to carry my pain. But children notice more than parents realize. I saw how he treated you, Emily continued. I saw how much you gave and how little he appreciated it. For the first time in years, I felt seen. Not as Robert's wife. Not as the person responsible for taking care of everyone. Just as Mary. A woman who had endured too much for too long. A few minutes later, Emily's husband David joined the call. David was a lawyer, and unlike Robert, he never dismissed my concerns or made me feel foolish. He listened carefully as I explained every document I had discovered. Every debt statement. Every receipt. Every suspicious transaction. Every piece of evidence. When I finished speaking, there was a long silence. Then David finally responded. Mary, you did the right thing by not confronting him. Those words immediately caught my attention. David explained that Robert's actions were far more serious than I realized. The money was one issue. The affair was another, but attempting to say, Robert believes he controls everything because he never questioned his own assumptions, David said. That arrogance is his biggest mistake. Then he reminded me of something that happened years earlier. 5 years ago, Robert's company went through a financial crisis. At that time, he was desperate. He had accumulated debt trying to maintain the image of a successful businessman. He wanted everyone to believe he was wealthy, powerful, and respected. But behind that image was a mountain of financial problems. To protect the property from his poor decisions, legal changes were made. Documents were prepared. Ownership records were updated. And Robert signed everything without paying attention. Because he believed paperwork was just a formality. Because he believed I would never understand it. Because he underestimated me. That was his greatest mistake. David confirmed what Robert never bothered to check. The land was mine. The house was mine. Legally, Robert no longer had the power he thought he had. For the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe. The fear that Robert would throw me away and erase everything my father left behind disappeared. My father's gift was safe. The home I sacrificed so much to protect was safe. But David warned me not to act too soon. Let him believe he is winning, he said. People like Robert become careless when they think they have complete control. So that was exactly what I did. I waited. Every day I played the role Robert expected. The quiet wife. The obedient wife. The woman who knew nothing. When he came home late, I did not question him. When he smiled at his phone, I ignored it. When he lied, I let him believe I accepted every word. But behind the scenes, everything was different. I documented everything. Dates. Times. Receipts. Bank records. Message. Financial statements. Every piece of evidence went into a folder that David reviewed carefully. Little by little, the truth became undeniable. Robert was not preparing for a fresh start. He was preparing his own downfall. The most difficult part was pretending. Sitting across from him at dinner while knowing everything. Listening to him talk about honesty while knowing how many lies he was hiding. Watching him act superior while knowing the truth beneath his feet was already collapsing. Some nights I wondered how the man I married had changed so much. Was this always who Robert was? Or did years of pride and selfishness slowly turn him into someone I no longer recognized? Eventually, I stopped searching for an answer. Because the reason no longer mattered. What mattered was protecting myself. Protecting my father's legacy. Protecting the life I still had ahead of me. One evening, Robert came home unusually cheerful. He acted kinder than usual. That alone told me something was wrong. After dinner, he placed a document in front of me. Mary, I need you to sign something tomorrow, he said casually. It is just some insurance paperwork. I looked at the papers. Then I looked at him. 30 years of marriage had taught me how to recognize his lies. His confident smile. His relaxed voice. The way he avoided my eyes. He truly believed I had no idea. He thought the final step of his plan was about to succeed. But I already knew exactly what those papers were. They were connected to the sale of the house. The house he had no legal right to sell. Instead of confronting him, I gave him a small smile. "Okay," I said calmly. "I will take care of it." Robert looked satisfied. He believed he had fooled me again. He walked away thinking victory was only one step away. But what he did not know was that his plan had already failed before it even began. The documents he prepared were not weapons against me. They were evidence against him. The lies he created to steal my future were becoming the very proof that would expose him. And for the first time in 30 years, I was no longer waiting for Robert to decide my life. I was deciding my own. The woman he underestimated, the woman he ignored, the woman he believed was powerless, was now the only person who knew exactly how this story would end. The next morning, Robert woke up believing he had finally achieved everything he wanted. For the first time in years, he imagined his life was completely under his control. Mary was gone. The divorce papers were waiting to be completed. Jessica was beside him. And the house he always claimed as his own was finally free from the woman he considered a burden. At least that was the story Robert told himself. He walked through the living room with a satisfied smile, looking around as if he had just won a prize. The same house where I had spent 30 years cooking, cleaning, raising our daughter, and caring for his family had already become his symbol of victory. Jessica stood near the window, looking around with excitement. "I think we should change everything," she said. "The furniture is old. The colors are outdated. This place needs to feel more modern." Robert laughed. "Do whatever you want," he replied confidently. "This is your home now." Those words came so easily from him. He had no idea they were completely meaningless. Jessica began talking about renovations, expensive decorations, and all the things she wanted to buy once the house was sold. Robert promised her everything. A new business, a better lifestyle, a future without problems. But all those promises were built on one thing: Ali. Because Robert was making plans with property that no longer belonged to him. At exactly 9 o'clock that morning, his phone rang. He looked at the screen and frowned when he saw David's name. "My son-in-law, the lawyer," Robert answered with annoyance in his voice. "What do you want?" David remained calm. "Robert, I am calling regarding the property and the documents you attempted to prepare." The smile immediately disappeared from Robert's face. "What are you talking about?" "The sale agreement," David replied. "The documents with Mary's signature." A heavy silence filled the room. Jessica turned toward him. For the first time, Robert looked uncertain. "I don't know what you mean," he said quickly. But the confidence in his voice was gone. David continued. "Robert, we have copies of everything. The financial records, the attempted sale documents, and the signature that Mary never authorized." Robert's hand tightened around the phone. The same man who had shouted at me the night before suddenly had nothing to say. Because this time anger could not save him. Control could not save him. Lies could not save him. Then David delivered the words that destroyed the illusion Robert had created. "You cannot sell that house because legally it does not belong to you." Robert froze. "That's impossible." For decades he had repeated the same sentence. "My house. My money. My property." He said it so many times that eventually he believed it himself. But saying something for 30 years does not make it true. David explained everything. "The land originally belonged to my father. The ownership records had been legally secured years earlier. The paperwork Robert signed during his financial crisis had transferred control of the property. The documents were official. The records were clear. The house belonged to me." Robert slowly lowered the phone. His face turned pale. Jessica immediately noticed. "What is going on?" she asked. Robert did not answer. Because answering meant admitting the truth. The house he promised her was not his. The money he promised her did not exist. The future he described was nothing more than an illusion. Jessica grabbed the documents from the table and started reading. The more she read, the colder her expression became. "Robert," she said slowly, "tell me this is not true." He stayed silent. And that silence gave her the answer. Jessica's sweet personality disappeared almost instantly. The gentle woman who claimed she loved him suddenly became someone completely different. "You told me this house was yours." Her voice became sharper. "You told me you had money." Robert tried to defend himself. "I was going to fix everything after the sale." Jessica laughed. But there was no warmth in it. "What sale? You don't even own the house." Those words hit Robert harder than anything I could have said. Because they came from the woman he sacrificed everything for. The woman he believed truly understood him. But Jessica never wanted Robert's heart. She wanted the successful image he created, the expensive gifts, the comfortable lifestyle, the promise of wealth. And now that everything was gone, so was her affection. The argument between them grew worse. Jessica demanded answers. Robert blamed everyone except himself. He blamed me. He blamed David. He blamed the documents. But deep down, he knew the truth. Every decision that led him there was his own. He was the one who lied. He was the one who spent money he did not have. He was the one who betrayed a 30-year marriage. And he was the one who tried to steal something that was never his. By the afternoon, reality finally reached him. The key he proudly held the night before no longer represented power. It was just a piece of metal, a reminder of everything he lost. The house, the security, the respect of his family, and the woman who had supported him when he had nothing. A few days later, I returned to the house. But this time, everything felt different. For years, I walked through that door feeling like a servant in my own home. This time, I entered as the rightful owner. The silence no longer felt lonely. It felt peaceful. I walked through each room slowly. The memories were still there. Some painful, some beautiful, but they no longer controlled me. I opened the windows and let fresh air enter the house. For the first time in decades, it truly felt like mine. Emily visited often, and together we began restoring the place. The first thing we changed was the yard. The concrete space Robert created to erase my father's garden was slowly transformed back into something alive. Flowers returned, plants grew again, and a new tree was planted where my father's old oak tree once stood. Standing there, I finally understood something. Robert thought leaving me would destroy me. He believed losing him meant losing everything. But the truth was the opposite. Losing Robert gave me back the one thing I had been missing for 30 years. Myself. I no longer woke up worrying about someone else's anger. I no longer measured my worth through another person's approval. I finally lived for me. Months later, I heard that Robert's life with Jessica had completely fallen apart. Without the house, without money, and without the image of success, their relationship could not survive. The woman he chose over 30 years of loyalty disappeared when there was nothing left to gain. When I heard the news, I felt something unexpected. Not happiness. Not revenge. Just peace. Because I was no longer waiting for Robert to regret losing me. His choices were no longer my burden. His mistakes were no longer my responsibility. My story was never about watching him fall. It was about watching myself rise. For 30 years, I protected a home. But now I was finally building a life. A life filled with freedom. A life filled with dignity. A life that belonged completely to me.